Welcome, everybody. And I'm Myra Lewin, for those of you we don't know each other yet. And I'm glad to have you here today. Such a great topic for us to talk about. I'm going to speak for about 30 minutes and then we'll have question and answer. So let's just begin by closing the eyes for a moment and take your attention inside. And just take a nice deep breath and relax. So this is always such a topic that's near and dear to all of us, since we all eat and consume pretty much every day. I'd like you just to recall for a moment a time where you had a feeling of knowing that all is well, that there is no pain and there are no symptoms, and no fear and no anxiety. And if you feel like you've never had that time, then just imagine that possibility of peace and sweetness and gentleness. And then just open the eyes very slowly and easily. And as much as possible, keep your eyes soft and keep your attention in the center of your head. And if you're not familiar with that term, if you draw a line between the eyebrows straight back and from the tops of your ears straight across, where those two lines cross, that's, if you put your attention there, then it will give you the greatest opportunity to see if there's new information for you and to explore for yourself this topic. So the topic today, yoga and healthy eating. And this is very near and dear to me because it's something that made a huge, huge difference in my life. You know, I started practicing some meditation in the late 1980s and in yoga asana in 1989. And at that time, I actually was introduced to something called Ayurveda, and I couldn't even get near it. It just sounded way too complicated for me. And I thought I had healthy eating, and compared to most people on the planet, it would be considered that way, other than to someone who was familiar with Ayurveda. And but I still had problems. You know, I had some digestive problems, I had constipation off and on, and I had fluctuating energy levels. And those were the most prominent things, and they were significant, actually, had a big impact on my life. But I thought everything was okay, so it took me another 6 years before I would actually approach something, a new way of looking at this. And it happened because I was practicing in India, and I was very stiff, and my body really ached. And I had not eaten dairy, not because I thought, oh, I don't want to eat dairy. I just never liked it. And so I had been a vegan for 19 years. And and I was refusing to have the ghee that was being offered onto the food there. And that was a common thing at that time, not so common now, unfortunately. And the people I was eating with, they said, you know, why don't you take it? You know, and I said, oh, I don't know. I don't eat butter, and I didn't really know any different. So finally, they convinced me to try it, and in a week's time, it made such an enormous difference in how I felt that I realized that, you know, well, wait, there must be something more than I think I know everything, and perhaps I don't. And so that really started my journey with new things beyond yoga. And I say that because my yoga practice, my asana practice in particular, but actually even my pranayama and meditation practices had hit a wall, and sometimes would feel even scattered after practicing. And I was having some guidance from teachers. It wasn't like I was just off doing too much and that kind of thing. But so what happened was that I said, okay, well, this made a difference in this period of time. So then I embarked on looking at what is Ayurveda and what can it do for me. And I was told that it was a companion science to yoga, and that really without it, that I wouldn't be able to really to enjoy and the benefits that yoga practices have to offer. And in those practices in particular, that I would feel after practicing, that I would feel energized, that I would feel relaxed, that I would be able to have a calm mind at least some of the time. And I certainly wasn't there at that point. I wanted to talk about then some things that tie Ayurveda and yoga together. You know, the most important things that we do that have an effect on how we feel from day to day and our ability to realize ourselves, we could say, in yoga. Yes, because although we may approach yoga from the standpoint of physical exercise, we may approach it because we're seeking spiritual connection. We may approach it just because we want to feel better. It doesn't really matter which road you come in on, but at some point we start to recognize that, this is something that will enhance my connection to my higher self or to the God of my heart. And when I do that, I feel really great. And then I'm able to do whatever I'm doing in life, I can do it that much better. And then I can be of greater service in life because I'm not all wrapped up in my problems, you know, how bad I feel or whatever problem I'm having to go to a doctor about or whatever. So we'd like to avoid those things so that we can enjoy life, so that we can be in life more fully and we can have that experience of yoga, that we move ourselves in the direction of a state of yoga, which is that connection of body, mind, and spirit. So Ayurveda is the thing that I found that really makes a difference in that. And I just wanted to talk about where some of the overlaps then are in yoga and Ayurveda. In both traditions, it talks about something called the Gunas. And perhaps you've heard this term before. If not, it's a way of describing the aspects and the energies that are present in all of nature. And so since Ayurveda considers us part of nature as opposed to separate from it, then the gunas are very significant. So these energies then are called tamas, rajas, and sattva. And I'll describe them just a little bit, and then we can talk about how the things that we expose ourselves to create more or less of that energy in us. And that affects everything we do. And in particular, our ability to practice yoga in a way that feels like it's taking us in the direction we want to go. So tamas means inertia. It's things that are dead. And it's also the energy of our sleep. You know, we become inert when we go to sleep. Our consciousness shuts down. So things that are tamasic, though, that is the darkness. So foods that are tamasic are things like leftovers, barbecued food, burned food, and then meat and things that are dead. Mushrooms are also tamasic. So these are things that create a lower vibration in us. Now, again, these are not good and bad. There's just some of these things we'd like to have less of, right? Because we're going to have tamas present in us because we go to sleep every day. And then from there, we go to rajas, which is the energy of activity, and it leads to disturbance. And rajas is what has us get out of bed in the morning and get up and go to work and do life. So we need some rajas. When there's too much rajas, such as when we listen to loud heavy metal music or are continually around extremely stimulating environments, then the mind starts to become really overactive. The foods that increase rajas in particular are things that are hot and spicy and refined and processed, heavily processed foods. So they'll create more activity in the mind, and they tend to lead toward disturbance and aggression. So for example, there are a lot of yoga asana practices that people are doing these days that might be considered rajasic because they don't bring an evenness of energy and calmness to the mind, right? So that's just something to think about. You know, think about how am I practicing yoga? And what attitude am I practicing with? And what am I actually doing? And those things all make a difference. But the most important part is the attitude, because that's the gunas at work. And then from rajas, we go to sattva. And sattva is balance and harmony. And in that balance and harmony, there's light. So perhaps you've heard the statement that darkness is really just an absence of the light. So what we're doing in our practices, in yoga practices in particular, is that we want to move in the direction of sattva. We want to create more light. When we have more light in us, our vibration is higher, we feel better. So activities that bring more sattva into us, would be a sattvic yoga practice. And that would be a pranayama practice that is balanced according to our constitution. It would be asana practice that leaves us feeling energized and relaxed rather than overstimulated or worn out. Foods that bring sattva into us are most fresh fruits, most fresh vegetables, most nuts and seeds. There are some exceptions in each category. Most legumes. Some of the legumes are a little more rajasic. Again, though, a small amount of that is going to be an okay thing, right? Because we need some of that rajas to keep us going in the world. And each of us gets to decide how much that is. So when we look at tamas, rajas, and sattva, this is not just what does it do to my body, but it's what does it do to my mind. So if I have more tamas foods and more tamasic activities, then my mind is going to tend to be lethargic. I'm going to prefer to sit on the sofa and watch television as opposed to taking a walk out in nature. If I participate in many rajasic activities, then I'll tend to get a little bit more aggressive, and sometimes that can become excessive, and that leads to it doesn't bring as much peace in life. And then when I do things in a sattvic manner, when I consume sattvic food, then the mind, over time, it becomes more and more calm. And this has certainly been my experience. And having been someone when I started, did not have a calm mind by any stretch. And I'd been practicing quite a while when I really started to recognize that, this can really be different. And that happened when I started to meet people who had been practicing yoga much longer than myself. And then when I started to meet people who practiced Ayurveda as well, I could see the difference in them. There was more light in them. They looked healthier to me. So there's some things then in Ayurveda that are talked about that relate to yoga, tamas, rajas, and sattva. We want to have things that consume things that promote sattva in us, balance and harmony. Additionally, there are other things, balancing your dosha and keeping the agni strong. So the dosha is a way of describing the elements that are present in each of us. And we each have a unique balance of those elements. And when it's in balance, we feel great. We don't have any symptoms. We don't have illness. All these things that many of us tend to accept as part of life, like PMS or indigestion and those kinds of things, they're not meant to be there. And we can be without those. And then what that does is it gives us the opportunity to age gracefully, to be able to do the things in life that we really want to do, and to be able to do them and enjoy them and be effective in them. The other thing then that makes a big, big difference, we don't have enough time here to go into a lot of details of the doshas, but there is information on the Halipoli website about it, and there's a library of self-healing and a number of posts about that. So, and also about the gunas, tamas, rajas, and sattva. Agni is our digestive fire. So it's the energy that's available to us to process everything that we expose ourselves to. So it's not just what we consume through our mouth, but it's what we look at, it's what we listen to, it's what we put on our skin. Agni is very, very important. And if you thought, this Ayurveda thing, it sounds like too much to me, I don't understand it. And it's easy to go there because it's holistic in nature. And that's very different than most of us have been trained. We've been trained to look at things in a compartmental way and then to try to fix it. And what we do in Ayurveda is that we go to the root cause of things, and then we look to make the changes there. So with Agni, then, you can make some changes on your own without ever learning anything else about Ayurveda, and it will make a big difference in your life. So I mentioned how, for myself, I started having ghee, which is an absolutely wonderful, a wonderful food. We use it medicinally as well, both internally and externally. And so there is also some information in the Library of Self-Healing about ghee and how to make it yourself and the wonderful healing qualities of it. Ghee also is very, very good for balancing all the doshas and for strengthening your Agni. But the Agni is, if you think of it like a fire, and if you stoke a fire and you put some wood into it and give it a little air, then the fire will get bigger. And if you take away, or if you throw sand on the fire, or you don't feed it enough wood, for example, then the fire starts to smolder. It'll still be going a little bit, but there's not so much. And when that happens inside of us. And that happens when we do certain things. So I'm going to talk about some things that if you stop doing these things, your Agni will be stronger and more stable. Because a lot of us, without realizing it, and this is something that I went through for years and didn't understand, is that the Agni will get very strong and we get really hungry, and then you eat a whole bunch, and then it gets weak, and I didn't recognize it as weak Agni. I recognized it as I'm not digesting so well, things aren't going so well, or I'm burping, or I have some gas, and then I might have some constipation or diarrhea. Those are the things that many people live with every single day, and we don't have to. So, and the key to that is Agni. Keeping the Agni strong will do so much for you. So I'll just mention some things then that weaken our Agni. Now you say, well, I have a really good appetite and I can eat a lot and it's no problem and I digest food just fine. And then there might be these certain foods that don't work very well, or just those certain times where it doesn't feel very good. And so we can come to understand how I got there. How did that happen? So if you think of feeding the fire, one of the things I used to do was that I really prided myself in the ability to go 8 or 10 hours without eating. And I thought, oh, isn't that great? I don't have to bother to eat and I can just, get lots of things done. And so what happens during that time is it's like not putting wood on the fire, so it gets very weak. So then when I do eat, then it's problematic. It doesn't matter how perfect that meal is. It's not going to digest well because there's not enough Agni or fire to transform it, to be able to do anything with it. There are other ways that we weaken our Agni, and some of these are pretty significant because they've become very common. And one of them is eating very quickly and not chewing your food. So that food is not going to get digested properly because the food needs to be liquid. So you need to chew the food to liquid. People ask, well, how many chews? And I used to say, well, 20 chews at least. But that's not really true because there might be some foods that it's not 20. What we really need to do is pay attention to getting the food to liquid so the body can do something with it. And what that also does is it keeps the food in your mouth long enough so that the digestive enzymes that are present in your mouth and start the process can do their job. So one of the things I love about Ayurveda is that it's a way of getting us to cooperate with what nature offers us. The body is an amazing, amazing tool gift that we've been given. And it works really well if we just treat it reasonably well. Some of the other things that we do that weaken Agni are to eat too often. If you eat before the previous food has fully digested, neither of that food, the first meal and the next one, are not going to digest well, and the result will be indigestion. And you might say, well, I don't really get indigestion. I just get a little burping. And that is the beginning of it. And any of those little digestive symptoms that we get are the things that they're actually the beginning of the disease process. And that's a discussion for another time. But just know that your body's saying, hey, something's not right here. Then there are other things, such as eating right before bed. Now, when you go to sleep, the energy is drawn away from the digestive process. So if you have food digesting in your system at that time, it's not going to digest well. And most of you may have had this experience. You wake up the next morning and you feel groggy. And so that groggy feeling is from the heaviness of the food, and it didn't digest well. And once it's gotten to that point, a lot of people, will take something or drink something in particular or try to eat something in particular to make that feeling go away. And it might give you relief in the moment, but the problem is there, and it's going to get worse, actually. And so just eating, keeping your meals and any eating at least 2 and preferably 3 hours away from prior to going to bed. Another thing that weakens the Agni is not giving conscious attention to the process of eating. So if you're watching television or looking at the computer or reading a book or those kinds of things, or standing up or driving a car, for that matter, is something I used to do. And those are all things that will disturb your digestion. So Agni will get weakened by that. And another one that's really significant is eating when you're angry or upset. So if something happens and you feel angry or you feel really emotionally disturbed, then it's really better at that point to take a break and see if you can collect yourself. And if not, then it's better to skip the meal. And I say that very carefully because in general you don't want to skip a meal, again, because it will weaken the Agni. Another time then that the body gives us a signal that there's a problem with the Agni is when you have that feeling like, oh, I feel like I might get a cold, or I feel like I'm coming down with something. I hear people say that. If you have that feeling, then you can be assured that Agni is weakened right then. Something has happened that has weakened it. And your best solution at that point is at your next meal time, is to just have some soupy rice. And this is just a really simple concoction of, we use white basmati rice with a little bit of a pinch of ginger, turmeric, and mineral salt. And you can put a little bit of ghee in there as well. And that just keeps it very simple but nourishing, and your body will be able to digest it. And the rice, it's better to use white rice because it's easier to digest. And most of the white basmati rice is not polished thoroughly, so there is still some of the germ on it. So those are the kinds of things, that we can do that, if I've made a mistake and I get myself in a position where it's not going well, meaning I didn't digest the food, then you don't want to go eat a big meal, right? Because then that's going to go right into the mess that's in your digestive tract. I'd like to just say then that what Ayurveda has to offer is a group of tools. It's a way of living, but in the beginning you can just take a few suggestions from it. And then you can work with those and see how it goes. And that's the thing, sometimes people ask me, well, exactly how much of this should I use, or what should I do with that? And that it really depends. And we're meant to be responsible for ourselves and get to know ourselves. What can I eat? What does my body do when I eat this certain food? Sometimes we think it's a food that is the problem. Yeah? Now, granted, if you're having, I was speaking to someone yesterday who has these things called energy drinks, and I can say that I have not experienced them. And she has difficulty focusing on anything and being able to do anything. You know, those it's sometimes it's really obvious. Oh, I'm doing this and I'm getting this result. Sometimes it's not so obvious. For example, when you combine certain foods together, they don't do very well. Yeah, so heavy foods, a number of them in one meal is going to be very difficult to digest. It doesn't mean the food is a problem. You know, and this is one of the things that's happened with dairy. Granted, we want to have good quality food, so not a low quality dairy, but there can be dairy from cows that are treated very well, and it has great benefits for human beings. But it needs to be consumed properly at room temperature or warm and in some very small amounts, not huge amounts and cold. So this is just to give you some ideas and maybe some things that you can work with that will get you started in a direction of being able to enhance your yoga practices and really everything and anything else you do in life. So with that, if you have questions, so this first question is, does one want to avoid tamasic or rajasic foods entirely? And is that most desirable? You probably won't avoid rajasic foods entirely, and I'm not sure that that's a good idea. I think it's the kind of thing that it depends a little bit on where your starting point is. You know, for yeah, if you have very high aspirations in terms of your yoga practices and samadhi and that kind of thing, then you perhaps want to do that. But otherwise, a small amount of rajasic food. So let me give you some examples. So avocados and papayas are considered rajasic because they have some strong sourness to them. Um, uh, and then, you know, and not something I do personally, but except when I travel sometimes, you know, I might have pasta, and pasta, unless you've made it fresh, is rajasic. So, but tamasic foods, I would say yes, that you could avoid them completely, as long as you're willing to be vegetarian. The most important thing is to pay attention to the results that you're getting. You know, how do you feel? And if your mind starts to feel calm and you calmer and you feel like you can have a greater sense of others around you and that, then that's something that I would really consider that, this is beneficial because now I can be a better person in my life. Next question is, are leftovers discouraged, even if the meal was prepared Ayurvedically the day before? Yes, they are. And you know, in my first book, Freedom in Your Relationship with Food, it was meant to be a transitional book. It was a book to get people to just acquaint themselves with Ayurveda and that. And in there I said, okay, I know how difficult it is for people because they're so used to doing leftovers. And so I gave the 24-hour rule. I said, okay, how about trying this first? Less than 24 hours old and don't reheat it because the prana is going down as soon as you cook it. And the raw food people love to go off on this one. You know, that, oh, you're killing the prana when you cook it. Well, actually, in that very light cooking initially, you actually wake up the prana and make it accessible. And that's actually why we cook food, so that you can digest it. And because most people can't digest raw food very well at all. And so so you want to eat it as soon as possible afterwards. And so I'd say your ideal is eat it the same day, you know, preferably within 10 hours. But again, you pay attention to how you feel. If you're eating food the next day, you probably aren't going to feel as good as if you would make some fresh food. So we really work hard at getting our quantities just right, you know, and sometimes we're off a little bit in that, but it's kind of a fun thing because it becomes an intuitive practice, you know, so it's sort of sensing, you know, how hungry is everybody, how does everybody approach this food. So I guess if you're trying to choose between eating out in a situation and that food, it would really depend. If I thought all that food was, refined and processed, I'd probably still eat the food that I had prepared, the Ayurvedic food the day before. But but if I have any option to have something else, something freshly prepared, I would choose that. Is it better to eat organic food that is packaged or non-organic food that is fresh? Oh, another tough one. Except, what you really want to do is try to conduct your life as much as possible to have, food that you at least know that hasn't been sprayed and as little chemicals as possible on it. Um, but I get this question a lot because people say to me, they say, well, what if I could have uh, freshly prepared beans for rice and beans, but it's probably not organic, and or should I eat beans out of a can? And my answer is, and it's hard to give this answer, but I can say that I would eat the non-organic fresh food because you can say a prayer over it, and you have a much better chance of getting some prana, some life force from the food, because canned food is cooked in the can, and it's pretty dead. Are there some shortcuts with Ayurvedic cooking? Sometimes I can't wait for a rice or lentil to cook and need something hearty. Ah, that's a great question. You know, and this is something that took me quite a few years to warm up to, is I use a pressure cooker and a rice cooker. And for years and years, since the 70s, I had been I wasn't going to use anything electric, and pressure cookers were something that were so scary to me from my childhood because they didn't have safety valves on them then. Uh, so yes, the shortcuts are really quite incredible. Now you can get small pressure cookers, little guys that are great for one or two persons or one or two servings, and you can get larger ones, of course, too. And you can put the rice and the bean in there together. For example, if you're going to make split mung, that's the simplest. And you could cook the whole, put some spices in it, and cook the whole thing in less than 20 minutes for the entire process. Now, you can also do that in a rice cooker. Split mung will cook in a rice cooker, and you can put it in there with the rice. And so it's kind of a mushy concoction when it comes out, but that's also a pretty quick way and have to give little attention to it. And actually, I have also done in the past where I would cook some rice and mung in a pressure cooker, and then take uh, take it off pressure, release the pressure, open it up very quickly, toss some vegetables onto the top, close it back up for 2, 3 minutes at the most, and then open it up and eat it. And that's, I don't have to do that now, but I have had times in my life where I've done that, and it works very well. So you just steam them with the heat that's already in there, just a little bit, and that's a very quick way of doing it. Pressure cookers now, we have a nice post in the Library of Self-Healing talking about how to use a pressure cooker and how to get over some of the fears about it and some tips actually on how to use them efficiently. If the goal is to increase lightness in yoga for increased awareness and consciousness, is it better to favor light foods like salads and sprouts? Ah, great question. No, it's not. But do you need a reasonable balance of things? Yes. Now, it will depend on your constitution. So, yeah, but let's go back to, is the goal in yoga to increase lightness? There is a point on beyond which it's not appropriate because you won't be able to function. And I know people who have done this before, and I headed in that direction at one point myself, but prior to Ayurveda. And that is that assuming you want to continue functioning as a human being, then the answer to your question is no, you don't want to do that, because too much light food like salads and sprouts, salads are very astringent, difficult to digest, and not very nutritious. sprouts, they have a lot of nutrition in them, but they have a lot of ethers in them. They have a lot of lightness, as you know. Then, so if you have too much of them, then you will end up with too much air in your system, or and ethers, the vata dosha, and that will lead to big problems. Uh, so vata is responsible for many things in the body. It's responsible for movement being the most important thing. And if you have too much of it in your body, it will cause disease. That's it. It's the amount of disease that vata excess is responsible for is twice as much as pitta, and then twice again as much as kapha. So that's sort of a short explanation for that. But what you can do is have a moderate sattvic diet, which is what we do. On my farm here, we have a variety of constitutions, as we have people coming to work on the farm, to visit, people coming for treatment, and that. And so we make sure that we stay in a moderate range with things on an ongoing basis. We do that by making sure that we have enough augmenting food, and will answer your question. Augmenting food is food that has the sweet taste, and has the earthiness. It's things like sweet potatoes and pumpkin and squash and carrots are lighter in that. So there's a range in there, but we need those foods because they are what help us feel grounded. They give us nourishment, and they also give us that feeling of nurturing with the sweet taste. And when you get enough food that way, then you don't go running around looking for chocolate and sugar and all that all the time too. So, so there's this moderate place that will allow you to have that lightness, but continue to function, keep the dosha in balance. And so the question would be to me, for example, because I have a primarily vata constitution, and have had excess vata in my life, and I can tell you that I don't eat sprouts often, but I do have them occasionally. I like them, and we'll take them and put them on top of a dish that's been cooked, just for a minute, and let them cook just slightly, and then eat them right then. I'm having a hard time saying goodbye to coffee, yet I can feel that it doesn't belong in my body. Do you have a suggestion for a transitional beverage? Actually, yeah, there are some pretty nice ones. Um, Usually it's something with barley and chicory are the things that people like the most, because it's got some hardiness to it. So I'm not so familiar with the brands anymore. A brand named Pero, Pero, used to make a roasted one. Now, if you have a lot of vata, it's not ideal, but it's okay, for the transition. Uh, but I think there are some new brands out there of that. But anyway, that you could get some barley, chicory, and if you're prone to, put some milk in it, give it some hardiness and that sweet grounding nature. And then also or sweeten it with honey or maple syrup or sucanat if you prefer something like that. Those are things that will usually help. Coffee has caffeine. Caffeine is a drug, and we become attached to it ritualistically. The body becomes attached to it, but the body really only needs about a week to get over that. It's the mind, and a lot of people come to believe, oh, I can't function without it because I won't eliminate. But what it's doing is it's dehydrating you and it'll make that more and more difficult over time in your life. So I would try some of that. And then some of the herbal teas that are available now out of Africa, the rooibos tea and honeybush tea, they're a little more hardy and can be very helpful for that transition. But what it really takes is that internal decision. You just have to decide you're done with it. Yeah. And, I like to tell people you need to connect the consequences with what you're doing. In other words, when I drink coffee, and if you're young and you haven't been doing it that long, you might not be having any of this yet, but it will contribute to constipation. It will contribute to aggravated both vata and pitta doshas over time. So it does cause some significant imbalance. How important is seeing a practitioner to determine my dosha? Over time, at some point, you want to do that, but I will say that you can do an awful lot on your own. The risk is, and it's not that big of a risk. People say, well, I might do the wrong thing, and I think the most important thing to understand is that if you can get a feeling for the doshas, for example, in my book Freedom in Your Relationship with Food, it goes over the characteristics of each and what the imbalance and the balance looks like. So if you can determine your imbalances, then what I want to say is that if vata is one of them, then you want to treat vata first. So you calm vata first without aggravating pitta or kapha. And if you look at the things that you would do to calm each of those, then it'll become fairly obvious. You can do that without knowing exactly, oh, am I more pitta or more kapha? Yeah, because you could be a kapha constitution but have aggravated vata, and it's going to show up looking like your vata because that's what's most prominent to you. But we encourage people when they take a quiz, for example, which is a great way to get started, and to do it based on how you are right now in life, and then how you have been through the majority of your life. Now, some of us had dosha imbalance all our lives. I would ask some other people who've known you a long time for their opinions on some of that. And then, getting a pulse diagnosis is also really your nice confirming thing in terms of your dosha and constitution. But you can, like I said, you can really start to work on bringing dosha into balance without knowing exactly. And then also always remember too, if there's um, that working on Agni, strengthening Agni is really important too. Is there a too much level we may hit when using spices in Ayurvedic cooking? Absolutely yes. There is actually. The Ayurvedic spices are used for the purpose of aiding digestion, to bring balance to the meal because we'd like to have all 6 tastes in the meal. And then we use them for taste too. And but if you think about that digestive quality, then most of them, not all, but most of them are warming. So if you use too much of them in the summertime, you're going to get overheated. And so, for example, we've just gone through a much warmer summer than we normally have, and we had to really lighten up on the spices. And as a general practice, I would say if you live in a place where you have a hot summer, then you'll use less spices in the summer, and then you'll go up, especially if you have a cold winter, and you'll go up, to that more a little bit higher moderate level. But too much, yes, of anything is going to cause imbalance. That's the thing with Ayurveda is that we want to bring things back to balance, and if a pendulum swings, it goes one way and then it goes the other way, and the balance is in the middle. So um, if you're thinking it's too much, I can guarantee you it probably is. So I'll try a little bit less. Yeah. The other thing I just want to say too is that in the wintertime, I might use more spices in the food, meaning more different spices. And in the summertime, I keep it even simpler. And so I might use 3 where I might use 5 in the wintertime. Okay, I think we're just about out of time. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. This is something I just love to talk about, and I hope that we've given you some things to think about that can help enhance your yoga practices. Um, the combination of the 2 things has given me a life beyond my imagination. I really can't say enough about how, even like I said, just taking up some of these practices and moving away from uh, the modern way of approaching how we eat and live will make an enormous difference in the value of your yoga practices to you. And then that gives you a greater opportunity to put that out in the world. So Thank you very much to be here with you today. And let's just close the eyes for a moment and take a nice deep breath and relax again, and just allow yourself to explore the information. And then we'll just have an Om to remind us of our vibration from our tailbone up to the top of the head, and that this vibration, we can exude it out from our body and through our aura. Namaste.